Pinkertons Ghosts is a horror anthology podcast by Superversive Radio, with no affiliation with any detective agency, person, real or imagined, or the dark forces of Outre Terre. It is not intended for children.
Morrow reporting in. I was not ready for this mission, or taking any mission control. You've done a lot for me and Jack, but it's not that I'm grateful. I didn't like what I had to do. You understand. I know why you chose me. I bet you have 100 reports to go through, but you'll go through mine properly. As it should be. I was the one who talked to her, after all. Killed her. I resented being dragged away from Jack. I want you to know that. It was good for me. The boy... What did I tell him? 12 years old now. I think he might be 13. He started his growth spurts. He's a little more angry than I like. I never got to enjoy Jack as an infant. I let him out in a park for exercising and socializing some time ago. I watched some mothers with their little adorable babies. I couldn't bear to hold them. I couldn't bear to not. Jack saved me an awkward conversation by catching a possum and rubbing the poor thing against the other children. To disguise their scent, he said. I don't think I'm invited to any Tupperware parties. At least he's taking some lessons to heart. But he's not... well. He's getting an edge to him. He and I had an argument, shouting and all. He wanted to know where Tom and Orion went. I told him I didn't know, and it wasn't good enough. I've gone and talked to some old wise women. They told me he needs a man to model himself after. His Morrowness will out, but he needs focus and guidance first. I didn't tell them I wasn't married. I didn't want his pikeness to out. I want to take his soul out of his body. I'm his mother. We can do that. I want to hold his soul and spirit and mind and all that Jack is, and eat the portions I hate. Just a nibble. Get that anger down. Make him that passive kid who couldn't stop chasing animals. The kid who'd listen to Tom Morrow's stories and jokes. The kid who'd take Orion's wisdom to heart. I could do that forever. Can't I? Just tear it out. Tear out that nasty violence. Tear out some of that ambition. He wouldn't do any good for people to find him. Someday he'd be interested in other women. Just eat and bite and eat and bite until he's a good boy. He's my good boy. Forever. On days when it's bad, I'd get close and feel the urge to bite. No. Jack has to flourish. He has to be his own man. And I don't just mean as an adult male. I mean a good man. With all the wrath and ruin that comes with it. So, I gave him to old Shawnee. That old soak will do anything for firewater. Jack wasn't happy to be separated from me. but I told him I had to do this. He said that Tom and Orion had to as well. I promised him I'd be back. I had to pay the Paranormal Pinkertons back for everything that they did for us. He understood that. Didn't even cry. I was the first to arrive. I didn't like being the only woman among the agents, but they were polite enough. I discovered later that they had been briefed. As much as I'd like the flattery of a dinner invitation from those strapping monster hunters, I appreciated your forethought, Control. The mission follows. The Japanese Paranormal Government Organization, the Ministry of Sacred Groves, Sonaru Morisho, had sent a representative shrine maiden with entourage to meet with and marry an unknown entity south of the border. From there, she would be taken further south to unknown territories via the port of New Orleans. The Ministry of Sacred Groves had put an immense amount of pressure on the Security Commission in days. The Department of American Zoological Extraordinaries to not interfere. Neither side wanted a marriage alliance between Japanese and who knows what paranormal forces. And so, we were hired to capture the maiden and bring her in for questioning. The Sonari Mori show is immensely powerful within the Asian supernatural circles. Japan lost World War II, for sure. But their paranormal agents took as much as they could from the Chinese, Koreans, and Southeast Asians, either through bribery or pillaging. The demon sacrificed 9 Shinto maidens to itself, and then left the man. And other means. While merely possessing paranormal material is meaningless without the will to use it, the ministry does and will. Kyoto wasn't bombed because the United States government had some sort of pang of mercy. They didn't spare Dresden. They didn't bomb it because a man allowed himself to be filled with Susano no Mikato and shot down most of the bombers. This was repeated as often as necessary. The shrine maiden was a girl of 16, named Yamadera Hana. I was asked if I could recognize her from my youth. No joy. The picture was distorted grayscale, but she was pretty in the Asian sense. Long hair, sharp cheekbones, eyes that were distinctly Japanese. I've met a few of them back in the compound. Not this one. She seemed happy. I felt pity. It is a terrible thing to marry a man who thinks himself a god. The setup was simple. I was to approach the party and reason with Hana. If she would come with us willingly, good. If she didn't, well, we'd have to cross that bridge when we come to it. Sometimes people don't know what's good for them. She had used a trick of the Third Hemisphere to walk from the shrines of Kyoto to the cemeteries east of Port Sulphur. The gateway would be anchored by the voodoo practitioners that inhabit the area. We didn't want to nip it in the bud, because we wanted the girl. Besides, we didn't want to cut off a transport route that we could monitor. It's like this. In Mexico City and Manila, there are alleys which connect the two together. One could go down an alley in Mexico City and spend a day in Manila, Philippines, without ever realizing the change, and return that way the same day. It is the same when one travels in the Third Hemisphere. One step, 1,000 miles, or barely an inch, in our own world. With the voodoo priest performing unholy sacrifices to draw her and her party through, she'd have no problem stepping onto American soil in a few minutes' walk. Several previously inactive shell companies suddenly rented boats at the Bora boat docks. So, that was her goal. Once she was on those boats, it was too late. she'd be given to whatever horrible fate awaited her. If she even understood what path she was on. I don't think anyone ever does. People willingly avoid God, but they don't always think they'll get hellfire. I was the point man. I was to try to talk to the girl and bring her in. The men were there if things turned violent. They were armed to the teeth. Machine guns, swords, relics, and all. The girl would be protected and guided by Hyaki Yagyo. This is a procession of yokai. Usually, it's unfocused, intent on mischief and terror. Now, it was a marriage procession. The Ministry of Sacred Groves had provided a list of oni and monsters that would follow in her train, carrying gifts and weapons for the groom. This was a courtesy, and to ensure we couldn't accuse them of scattering monsters in our country. There were no humans other than the girl. That would make things easy for the men. I was outfitted with some heavy cloth armor, the kind that would resist claws, but could do nothing for the force of a club. I'd have to run for it if things go bad. I had a couple of knives on my person, a 9mm, an ankle holster with a .38 snub from home. I must have looked a sight in bulky gear, cut to look like a detective's trench coat. I put on Tom Morrow's fedora on top of it. I ignored some "yeshies" from the guys. They should have been more nervous. The only problem with having a day job like this, like a suit you take off when the hours are met, is that it makes you forget that there are true believers. The men set up their blinds and waited. They were good, professional. I could barely tell where they were. I sat on a stool in the middle of the road, waiting. Louisiana is a cursed land. The mosquitoes ignored the bug spray. I was sweating half to death 5 minutes into our wait, and there would be many hours to go. At 3 a.m., there was a flash of red lightning a few miles to the west. That was certainly a sign that something had come forth to walk in the night. Mist rolled in. Light. Not of America. I couldn't explain why I thought like that. I just knew it wasn't the right consistency, or color, or anything. Lights bobbed over the mist, only illuminating a few feet around them. I had not realized how light-starved I was. I nearly walked to them. Instead, I sat and thought about what I would say to her. I saw the light first, but the second came after. Soon, light bells and stringed instruments filled the soundscape of the night. It was hypnotizing. The lights bobbed up and down and swung side to side in a beat never quite clear enough to dance to. I stood when I could see the parade itself. 3 crowmen held lanterns in the front, while a red ogre carried a covered pelican on his back. Despite its precarious position, the beast walked in a way that kept it from moving too much. There were others behind, kappas and more crowmen. The first of the crowmen, who each were immense birds, with wings bending like hands, and their feet moving like human legs, stopped when he saw me and croaked out. "Daughter of Adam, American, why do you waylay us on the road? We are the wedding procession of the sacred Yamadera Hana to meet her groom. Do not stop us. I know you people hold marriage sacred. What is better than the union of lovers? Step aside and we will not curse you." His Japanese was formal. I am translating that too. Imagine a person, in the most polite terms, invites you to drink tea and asks you what you would like, They then apologize profusely and say they only have one kind of tea, and that you are a bad person for wanting any other kind of tea, but that it is your choice which tea you want. It's hard to parse on purpose. The speech ran 5 minutes long for that simple paragraph. I replied with similar politeness. Carrion Crow, you are far from any battlefield. I have come to greet Yamadera Hana and to speak with her for but a few moments. It is not tradition in America to allow women to be attended by monsters, or allow them to be ferried against their will, or without free will. Ah, you doubt that she is capable of loving her groom. No fear of that. He is mighty, prestigious, and rich. And what is better than that? A fair and young voice rang from the curtains. Enough. Dearest Elder Crow, you are insulting her, when she only wants to see if I am willing. Americans have always been strange. Put me down, Goro. With a grunt, the ogre let down the palanquin. With barely a rustle of the curtains, out stepped the girl, Hana. I felt my breath catch in my throat. The panic sunk claws into me. She was wearing a shrine maiden's outfit of a white robe and red dress. But her dressmakers had decorated it with flowers and depictions of storms against the mountains. Her feet were covered, but sandals with that peculiar single column peeked out from under the red and gold hem, adding a full foot to her height. A golden robe girded her waist and poked out from either shoulder in a massive bow. Her face and head held my attention. It wasn't quite like the picture. Her hair was white as snow and piled up in a hairdo I had seen the Japanese use in marriage ceremonies. 2 golden hairpins held a veil in front of her eyes, but it was light. I could see through it. Her features were too pointed, almost too cute. Like too little was set against too much. In her hands, she held a bouquet of flowers, arranged too perfectly not to be meaningful. I could not see her nails, but I wanted to. Almost all of her skin was covered, but her face, which she hid coquettishly behind the bouquet. I pushed my suspicions down. I must have been nervous. I was putting my own self and fears and nightmares onto her and her appearance. Was I not dressed similarly when I drank the Bacchus wine and prepared Jack for... I pushed one of my fingernails into my hand. The focus returned. I would like you to come with me, miss. Even with your entourage, it's dangerous to be out at night. Not for me. Not for this night. The auguries were clear that I would experience no interference from the dark powers. I have nothing to fear. No one means me harm. I am loved and beloved. I have been raised on milk and fat and given every comfort. I will repay with endless love. My future husband, called the Lord of Blood and the Giver of Harvest, has been enamored of me since I was offered to him. His brutal ways will be civilized. His powers will grow, and I will drink deep of the sacrifices he loves. It's a lie. You are a sacrifice, a pawn, and if it isn't you on the altar, it will be your children. Come with me. Let me protect you. I've been where you've been, and performed the dread rites under Aldebaran to ward away the evil influence of Algol. This was another life before this. Do not give yourself to some demon. Damnation can be halted by the blood of Christ. The girl and her entourage laughed. What? Exchange my robes, magic, and perfection for ugliness? I see the hardness of your heart. You are a waste. You spent every bit of your love for what? When do you laugh? When do you ever experience joy? No. These things are strangers to you, and will be forever. You drink deep of every pain. Instead of misery, I choose wealth and power. Even if the giver of harvest is lying about his luxury, so long as he has a temple, I will make it luxurious. I have given up nothing, and everything I want is given to me. Just because you couldn't pay the price doesn't mean I didn't. With that, she turned her back to me. I ran after her. I bowled the crows over and grabbed her hair. Listen! The hairdo fell apart and revealed the horns poking from her skin. She laughed at me. Like I said, just because you couldn't pay the price doesn't mean I didn't. She twisted and struck me open-palmed in the chest. I was thrown from my feet onto the road. Hannah screamed to the skies. She is not here alone. Kill them all. Collect the blood. My husband will love me the better for it. I had lost my breath a moment, but my training and instincts took over. I ran for the side of the road, opposite the armed men lying in wait. They had opened fire before I had struck the ground. Hannah ignored her retainers. The agents didn't fire on her. It would have been easier for me if they did. I'm sure that they followed protocols. I slipped down to the swampy ground. We had chosen our ground carefully. The locals knew better than to investigate gunfire, and the day's contact would take care of the police. In the case of being attacked, I would leave the area and return to base. The men knew their work. Hannah jumped over my head and landed between me and the swampy forest I had planned for my escape. She stood over me and gathered her dress. With a twist, she struck with an open palm. She hit my vest and armor. I slammed against the ground. The mud took away the force of the blow. The ripple of the blow spread from the vest, shredding the clothing and padding with the aftershocks. The breath left my body. I coughed up blood. I forced myself up. Hannah smiled. Her sharp teeth gleamed. She rotated her hands, making gestures. She twisted again, lunging with a closed fist. I was ready for her new blow. It passed by me. Her fist sunk to the ground. The road cracked. The mud rippled, and flowers burst into bloom. I ran into the forest, jumping from root to root. She screamed in frustration and chased. She did not have a year of experience hiding in the forest. If I had tripped, even once. She jumped again, flying after me. She jumped from the trunk of a tree, her body preparing for the strongest blow yet. The trunk shattered, the sound lost in the gunfire. I was ready. I dodged to the side. She completed her strike, her knuckles snapping the tree in half. I pulled my gun and shot her twice. It wasn't very effective, but it kept her in one place long enough for the tree to fall on her. She was trapped. Her dress was ruined. Her hairstyle was in tatters. Most of her decorations had been lost in the chase. She was screaming. I had been there. She couldn't push the tree off of her. Her arms were pinned under the weight, and she couldn't get an angle. The swamp was sucking her in, but she fought with everything she had to keep her head above water. I was conflicted for a bare second. Just one. She was a young girl, about the same age when I had been given a choice. Been given Jack. I made my choice to rebel. I took Jack from the sacrificial altar and charged into the night. I know now that God awoke true love in my heart. It was enough. I did not know the name of Jesus then, except in the abstract. I knew enough to choose love and life. She hadn't made the same choice. She had chosen herself over love and life. I walked over to the gasping maiden and knelt on her narrow chest. I kept her under until she stopped moving. I kept her down deep with my own hands, looking her in the eyes. I walked back to the men. They had won without casualties, just some injuries. They kept quiet around me, but one of them was gentleman enough to light me a cigarette. The mud on me had gotten everywhere. I let them finish up. They knew their work. Her body was collected and sent to Holt Lucari for examination. Please inform me of his findings. The unedited document, please. Jack was glad to see me. He showed me his buck he had bow hunted and ran down. Old Shawnee had taken the best cuts, but taught Jack his old ways of butchery. It was very nice. I was glad of him. He brought me out of myself. I don't want to live a life of selfishness. I'd rather he lived his fullness than myself alone. Control. I understand that you're a new mother. Congratulations. I'm glad that you and I have this connection. Please, do not be a stranger. My experience was unique. But you and I understand our need for secrecy. Morrow out.
Pinkerton's Ghosts is a podcast distributed by Superversive Radio, licensed under an attribution non-commercial, share-alike international license. This episode was written by Ben Wheeler and performed by Celina Saucedo. Ben Wheeler edits, directs, produces, and herds cats. Kid Dickerson performs our audio editing. Visit us on Facebook, read articles on superversivesf.com, or listen to us on unauthorized Acast, iTunes, or Spotify. Contact us through Twitter at @PinkertonsGhost, email us at pinkertonsghosts@gmail.com, or send us noble messenger possums with messages strapped to their backs. Don't worry, they know how to find us. Thank you for listening, and good luck.